Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are evolving our buildings for tomorrow. And here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we are speaking with Timothy Dunlop. He's the author of the book Why the Future is Workless. So in his career as a journalist, he saw a lot of technological disruption in the journalism industry as we saw social media and other tools coming through and disrupting print media. So in the buildings industry, we are on the verge of a lot of technological change also. So this topic is very relevant. Who is going to have your job in 20 years? Will it be some kind of artificial intelligence or yourself? Also, who is going to be the biggest benefactor of some of these huge changes that are potentially coming through? Will it be startups, your big corporate dinosaurs, or some of the tech companies? So this is a very relevant topic that often gets overlooked. Tim Dunlop, he really knows his stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. And without any further ado, here's Timothy Dunlop.
I kind of consider myself pretty much in the gig economy these days. I do a bunch of stuff. And in a sense, I've always been in that. I started back in the early 80s in small business, and I opened one of the first video libraries in Melbourne. It was like about the third or the fourth one that opened in Melbourne when that technology took off.
Yep.
And then I did that for a couple of years and actually had a couple of shops like that. And then I sold out of that. I kind of, lost interest. But we made some money on that because, we got in early and got out early and did pretty well. And then I went back to university and studied. I ended up doing a PhD in political communication. And then I submitted that in 2000, towards the end of 2001. But at that time also, my wife and my son and I moved to America. She was with Department of Foreign Affairs. She was a diplomat, and she was posted to Washington, D.C. So we went to D.C., which was, it was an interesting time to be there because it was just after the 9/11 attacks and the Iraq War was starting to happen. And I'd just submitted my PhD, and my PhD was all about public debate and, how do you get experts and politicians together with ordinary citizens to have meaningful debates. And not long after I got to America, somebody said to me, "Have you ever seen a blog?" And I had a look at blogs, and I thought, oh, well, that's kind of what I was talking about. I'd never heard of them at that point. But I looked at it and thought, well, yeah, you could actually use that space in a really effective way as a means of public communication. So I started blogging just sort of to see how it worked. But that was that time in America where blogs just went insane. There were suddenly 50 million of them. And that's probably no exaggeration. So I started writing about American politics, Australian politics, and that sort of stuff. Got swept up in that first wave of blogging. And, it actually became incredibly popular, the blog. It was getting like insane, hundreds of thousands of page views a month. That was a really interesting experience, and it was sort of an introduction to the new online technology in a lot of ways. It got me interested in journalism. I'd always done freelance writing, but it got me more into that. So when we came back to Australia in 2005, News Limited offered me a job running a blog for them, and I did that for a few years. Then I did a blog for Crikey for a while as well. Nice. Then I wrote a book about the history of journalism, the history of that period of journalism, the way the technology had affected journalism. And that came out in 2013. And, did reasonably well. It's on a lot of curriculums around the world. A lot of universities use it as a sort of a history book and guidebook about that. And then that sort of got me interested in, journalism's been upended in the way that it has. Surely this is going to happen to other industries as well. And that's kind of what led me to the second book, Why the Future is Workless, which is a more general look at the new technologies and the way that they're affecting work.
Yeah, so just in a nutshell, so what did you see in journalism, I guess, so the old paradigms and the big changes you saw probably pretty rapidly? Just in a nutshell, what did you see in that industry?
Well, it was the absolute core of it was the availability of information online changed everything. It basically deprofessionalised journalism. So it meant you didn't have to be a journalist to be able to participate in that space because they no longer had a monopoly control over the information. Anybody could access it through Google, essentially. So everything from, the latest economic reports to press releases by politicians, that used to be area of journalists. They were the people who had the authority and the access to that information, but suddenly everybody had it. So that's what changed.
Yeah, and it's probably something you can see now with, I guess, even podcasts now, rather than having just the certain sources of media you can consume right now. Right now, anybody can choose whatever they're interested in and listen to that all day. So it's been a positive change overall.
Yeah, look, I absolutely think it's been a positive change. It's got its downsides, but it's absolutely a positive change. It totally empowered the audience to be a player in a way that they'd never been able to be before. In the old media model, the audience was the product. They sold us to the advertisers because they could, they controlled a geographic area with a newspaper or whatever. And so the only way you could access the only way advertisers could access that audience was by paying the media companies, but that's all gone.
Yeah, nice. So you saw the media industry and journalism get upended, and now you wrote the book, Why the Future is Workless. So I guess first question, why do you think the future is workless? And we'll delve deeper into the concepts that whatever you bring up.
Okay, so the title's a bit of a pun. It's workless and work less. So it's just sort of an abbreviated way of summing up what's happening with the new technologies. Is essentially we've moved from a manufacturing type economy that required mass employment in things like factories, et cetera, to a more service-based and knowledge-based and information-based economy, which just doesn't need the same number of people involved in it. And so the thrust of the book is I don't think we can really, or nor should we, try and stop these technologies, but there's a big risk of ending up with a lot of people unemployed and, all the subsequent problems associated with that. Maybe there's some way we can embrace this technology and we can all work less but still, have a living.
Yeah. So what are some of these technologies that you talk about that are going to be probably the most influential at, I guess, automating a lot of our work we do?
Well, it's everything from actual, robots and robotic arms, which we've seen already happen in areas like agriculture and factories, just basically doing the jobs that humans used to do. What's really interesting now is, we're inventing this intelligence that exists outside the human mind, and it can do a lot of, and it operates in this virtual economy. So the whole existence of the online world, the platforms associated with that, but then the whole move into artificial intelligence and deep learning programs that can do sort of white collar work, cognitive work, and so, sort of what, in that sense, journalism was the canary in the coal mine. It was the first white collar profession that was upended by that, but it's starting now to happen with everything from accounting to medicine to law.
Yeah. So you mentioned like there was agriculture was one of them. So there was like, a few there was the Industrial Revolution and there's been automation in the past. So do you think this time it's going to be different to other times when automation, and we just created new jobs, but do you think now it's, for the first time, it's going to be different with all these new types of automation coming through?
Yeah, well, this is the big argument, and there's, the basic economic position is the technology doesn't destroy jobs, it displaces them, and you end up with a whole bunch of new jobs. And, there's plenty of evidence of that happening. There's social media experts, who have that sort of job. But I do think it is different this time in that the existence of artificial intelligence moving into white-collar areas is something that no one really anticipated, say, 20 years ago. We never thought the machines would get that smart that quick. And I think it does change the game a bit. And what I would actually like to see is let's take advantage of that, because, we've got this, the labour market's pretty buggered up at the moment. We've got a certain percent. We've never had so much underemployment and overemployment before. So we've got a whole bunch of people who would, don't feel they're earning enough money and would like more work and can't get it. And we've got a whole bunch of people who are working ridiculous hours and are suffering, stress and burnout and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if you saw, there was a news story today about a woman in Japan who died from overwork. And it's it's such a common thing there that they actually have a word for it. There's a Japanese word for dying from overwork, which I just find really distressing.
That's
So the labour market is really distorted in that sense. So if maybe we can use the technology and spread the remaining work out a little more evenly, maybe we end up with a more balanced sort of society.
Yeah, and another interesting one is probably the combination between some of the technologies. I interviewed Shane Scranton, who was the founder of a virtual reality company, and he's saying his vision in the future is to combine artificial intelligence with the VR. So then you go into VR, and when you're designing a building, you tell the artificial intelligence what you're doing, and then in the virtual world you come up with a design that way. So
absolutely. And look, that stuff's already starting to happen. I mean, the classic combination of technology is the internet and the phone, so that we've got the smartphone, so the smartphone just suddenly changes everything. That's, we're suddenly walking around with that computing power in our pocket, and it accesses this immense amount of information. We don't have to be sitting at a desk anymore for that to happen. So that sort of I think listening to people like him talk about that stuff is so fascinating, because it just makes you realise that we're just at the start of what this new artificial intelligence is going to be able to do.
Yeah. Nice. So do you think, with artificial intelligence coming through, do you think, I guess, the startups going to be, most in the best advantage, or the big corporates, or the big tech companies like Google, who owns the actual AI? Who do you think is going to get the majority of this work, assuming it gets automated?
Yeah, I think it's no doubt the advantage lies with the big companies. And this is one of the problems that we have with it. I think that ultimately is going to be something we have to address on a social and a political level, is that the tendency is that these new technologies concentrate wealth. And because of it's not just first mover advantage that the big companies have got, even though they do have that. So, especially Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, they have this huge advantage in this area. But even, like, say, within the legal profession or something where automation is moving more, artificial intelligence is doing more and more of like basic legal work, etc., etc. The huge advantage those big companies like, JP Morgan Chase, etc., have in that field is huge databases, because AI runs on data. So it's who controls the data controls everything, sort of thing. So it's very hard for startups to come into those spaces and disrupt, because they just don't have the access to the same amount of data.
Yeah, nice. So when you say big companies, you're talking more about the big tech, like your Googles, as opposed to, because we've got, say, big companies in the construction industry who probably aren't really taking much advantage of what's coming through. So do you think those kind of big companies might be in a bit of trouble as well if they're not proactive?
Yeah, look at the car industry. I mean, we're moving rapidly towards driverless cars, right?
Yeah.
and there's suddenly all these big tech companies in the space. In some senses, the car companies are playing catch up with that, or they're partnering with the tech companies, etc. I would presume it's going to be the same with the building industry. The building industry, it's got to be affected by things like, from the architectural side, the drones mapping areas and then using artificial intelligence to design buildings, etc. But you've got to also think in terms of 3D printing and other forms of automation. I was looking at online the other day at a machine that was laying bricks. Yeah. It's that sort of repeatable work like that is relatively easy to automate, I think. So, if I was a big building firm, I think I'd be getting out in front of that stuff and, being the building firm that is on the front foot with that stuff rather than having to play catch up later.
Yeah, nice. And it's, I guess, when you got a computer or a 3D printer printing something, it's a lot less wastage as well. So, there's already some commercial benefits I think they're reaping as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the 3D printing thing just kind of blows my mind, the potential there in the building industry. It must be immense. I mean, again, it's nascent. It's barely started now, but you can, you've probably seen them, the 3D printers in China printing out, structures like hut structures. They can print out 10 of them on a block of land in 24 hours sort of thing. That's and other ones that you can use different materials simultaneously, so you can basically print the electrics and the plumbing as you're building the wall sort of thing.
So looking at it from the I guess bigger picture, do you think at schools we're teaching the right kind of stuff so the people coming through schools are ready for this automation?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Look, I've spoken to a lot of teachers. I've spoken to education bureaucrats and stuff, and I would say that they are aware of these issues, but changing the way education works is a really, really tough thing. And partly it's because we don't quite know what direction to push kids in. But I think that the key thing with education is we can't just be focused on technical skills. In fact, given the way the technology changes so rapidly, giving kids technical skills is almost a training in obsolescence. What you actually have to train them for is to be adaptable, to be prepared for lifelong learning, to be creative, to be problem solvers, etc. You can do that in conjunction with teaching the technical stuff, but the technical stuff by itself is not enough. So I actually had an experience the other day where I was asked to address, it's a big school in Sydney, I won't name it, they're graduating year 12 class, and like, it's a school full of really high-achieving kids, and they're all going to go into things like medicine and tech and literally rocket science and stuff like that, all the really hard to get in, high-end technical, mathematical, scientific sort of stuff. But, sitting down and talking with them, they really struggled in that sort of social environment. If you talked about, the robot they built the other day, they'll talk your ear off and tell you everything about it, all the technical specifications and everything, and it's completely fascinating. But just that human one-on-one contact they struggle with. So I think schools really need to be doing both. You can't just, get a high-end group of kids like that and just give them technical training. You really have to stress the arts-related stuff as well, the so-called, they call them soft skills, but I think they're actually going to be vital.
Yeah, I recently read somewhere that schools are like very good at teaching us for the third industrial revolution, where we're doing just repetitive tasks where you might be required to sit down and shut up and do your job really well. But for creativity and that soft kind of skills, it's not really preparing us for. Yeah,
that's exactly right. The whole kind of architecture of schools presumes sort of that old-fashioned manufacturing, industrial mass production sort of model of an economy, which just doesn't exist anymore. There's research out by an Australian group. I can't think of their name. I'll try and think of it. Recently, and they predict that a 15-year-old at school today is likely throughout their working life to have 17 different jobs across 5 different careers. So their point is, not only do they now have to be trained to be creative and adaptable and problem solving to cope with that sort of environment, but the new skills that they need. If you're going to have 17 jobs in a lifetime, you're not going to go back to university or tech after each job and retrain. Do another 3-year degree or stuff. So you're going to have to train on the job, and that's a wake up call for businesses as well. They're going to have to provide that sort of training, etc. But also as workers, we have to be prepared for that. The expression that's commonly used is lifelong learning, and I think that's really the way it's going to go. I mean, think about it: 17 jobs in 5 careers. You're going to be learning a lot, so you're going to have that basic flexibility in your ability to learn, just to operate in that environment, I think.
Yeah, unreal. And working at a big corporate firm myself, there's probably some people who are probably not, I guess, some cultures aren't probably good for change, I guess. So what would you say for, some of the people who may be older in the managerial kind of positions at big corporates who are just, used to doing things their way and not ready for change? So what's some of the things that they might be able to do, you think?
They should go and look at the media industry. The media industry was exactly that, and I saw it when I worked at News Limited. There were that old school journalist and editor who were absolutely opposed to putting news online. They hated websites. They hated the whole idea of it. And the worst of it was they thought it was going to be a fad. They didn't think it'd last. And they resisted it and resisted it and resisted it. And basically the arse dropped out of the industry because the technology just changed, destroyed their business model, essentially. And it's really taken them a long, long time to get their head around that they have to actually play in this space. So I think that's the same for any corporation. You can't just ride it out. You just cannot. The only way is to embrace it, I think.
Yeah. So how about at the political level? Do you think, so we're obviously both Australian, do you think Australia's preparing at all, or what's your opinion on how, I guess, countries and in the public sector can prepare for this kind of stuff?
Well, if you'd asked me that a year ago, I would have said that nowhere in the world is really getting their head around this, including Australia. I think that's changing. I think people like Donald Trump and Malcolm Turnbull, had to put them in the same category, but there's Malcolm Turnbull ran on a campaign promise of jobs and growth, and Donald Trump ran on a very similar promise. Making America great again was basically about bringing back the old jobs, and I think that's a really silly way to do it. It's they're not really embracing the change that's coming. In fact, they're kind of denying the change that's coming. But there's evidence in other countries, in the Scandinavian countries, like already Sweden's moving towards a 4-day week, so a 6-hour day sort of thing, and that was led by corporations rather than government, but governments got on board with it. So Toyota started it. They actually reduced the number of hours without reducing the pay of their workforce, and found that they got much more productive. So that Toyota are actually making more money out of having workers working less hours, and there's a technology factor in there as well. And now the Swedish government is following that model in healthcare services and stuff that the government runs. Yeah. So there's a big push there. I don't know if you saw the latest Labor Party conference in Britain with Jeremy Corbyn, but they actually outlined a pretty ambitious new model for the economy of less work, so distributed across more people, moving away from the austerity model, embracing the technology as a way of increasing productivity and then redistributing the wealth in other ways, so that trying to again shorter working hours to deal with the unemployment issues, etc., and the growing displacement of people by machines. So look, there are as ever, it's a mixed story. In Australia, I don't think we're doing enough. I don't think Labor, the opposition party, is doing enough. They still seem to be in a bit of denial about this, and it's partly because they're a Labor party. It's very hard for them to talk about anything other than full-time jobs and full employment as a national goal. That's kind of the basis of their whole existence.
Yeah.
So
nice. The phone
no worries. So I think our politicians are still in a little bit of denial about this.
Yeah. So you mentioned redistributing the wealth. So how would a country or a Liberal or Labor Party go about distributing wealth? Like, why would the Google or the big tech companies do it? Is it a tax system and then spread it that way?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways of doing it. Look, the basic, the most popular idea. So look, here's the logic. The logic is fewer people have jobs, so you either let them starve, or you come up with so we've basically distributed national wealth traditionally through profits to corporations, the business owners, etc., and then through wages. And we've always had a pretty good balance between those two things. Over the last 20 years, that's got out of whack. So much more of the national wealth is going into profits than is going into wages, and then wages are again being affected by technological unemployment, people being put out of work. And we're potentially going into a period where that is going to increase. So, how do you address that? So you obviously need another way of distributing wealth. So you need access to the wealth that's being generated, so through taxes or whatever, and then a way to redistribute it. And the most popular idea that's put forward in that regard is what's called a universal basic income, UBI, which is the idea that we're all entitled to a basic wage, regardless of whether we're working or not. So it's universal, and it's there's no restrictions on it. So but everybody over the age of 18 gets, whatever it is, say $25,000 a year paid monthly, and everybody gets that. And so that's a floor beneath which you cannot fall. And then if you want to go into the workforce or run your own business or something and earn money from other ways, well, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But come what may, you get that $20,000 or whatever it is, that UBI payment every month, and this puts a floor under people's earnings so that they can't fall below it. So we end up retaining a functioning society without everybody falling into poverty.
Yeah, nice. That's a really cool idea, universal basic income. Just as we wrap it up now, we touched on, I guess, a few technologies and everything. So with the climate change coming through and technology and I guess the world economy and old paradigms changing new paradigms, are you an optimist about the future of what's to come, and what are you most excited about?
Oh, look, I come and go, Adam. It's basically optimistic. If you read my book, it's an optimistic book. It talks about, the potential for embracing the new technologies and, ending up with a workless future where we can do things other than, scrimp and scrape to make a living. But, it's undeniably a really tough political question, and we're going to go through quite a period of transition as these new technologies move into place, and there will inevitably be winners and losers. So, I'm often asked, especially by parents, what should my kids be doing to prepare themselves for this brave new world sort of thing? And my answer these days is generally get political, so start putting pressure on politicians themselves, but doing stuff yourself to change the way society works. Yeah. It's ultimately a political issue rather than a technological issue. Yeah. So, is that optimistic or pessimistic? Well, it's sort of realistic. Yeah. I think there's potential there for something really good, but it's a very difficult political process to get there.
Yeah, nice. And you mentioned for kids to get political who are probably a bit disengaged, a lot of, I guess, younger people. But what about, say, professionals? If they had to do one thing or adopt one habit in their lives to embrace what's coming, what do you think that one thing could be?
Gee, that's a really good question. Yeah, well, again, it probably depends on the industry and it depends on the person's position within that industry. But the biggest mistake I see, well, the biggest problem I see, and we sort of talked about it before, is this pretending that nothing's happening, or that if we just leave it to the market, it's all going to work itself out. So I think that's probably, and this goes to the heart of, that sort of flexibility, being willing to learn on the job and change and accept that the circumstances have changed. So I get, it sounds a bit corny, but I guess I'd say, keep an open mind about these things and frankly realise that this is change that is coming. Yeah. And there's probably, pretending that it's all just going to be okay is not going to be good enough.
Phenomenal. That's a fantastic way to end the podcast. Where can people find you or learn more about your books and all the things you're up to?
Well, the books are all available online or in all good bookshops, as they say. I'm all over social media. There's a pretty prominent LinkedIn account for anybody who wants to contact me. I've got a Facebook page, an author's page on Facebook. I'm pretty all over Twitter as well. Just Google the name, I'll probably come up. Yeah. I'm very happy to talk to anyone who's interested in these topics.
Hey guys, Adam here. Just before you go, just one quick request. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review. It helps our rating and ranking on iTunes so more people can hear from the people who are making our cities better places for our future.